Hi, and welcome to Go, a podcast about travel, places, and adventure. I'm your host, Alex Wolinski. Today, we're doing a special Halloween edition of the podcast to explore the real-life Dracula and the places you can visit today to see where he once, or maybe still does, roam. But first, this episode is sponsored by localbeyond.com. Local Beyond. Think outside the cubicle. Some of the earliest writings about this real-life person describe him as a demented psychopath, a sadist, and a gruesome murderer. You may know him as Dracula.
I am Dracula.
The bloodthirsty vampire made famous by Bram Stoker's novel of the same name. But his story is a bit more mysterious. Dracula was born in the year 1430 as Władysław Basarab Luxembourg. He grew up in a medieval walled city called Sigisara, located on top of a hill right in the heart of Transylvania. Here, you can visit the building where he was born and where he spent his first 5 years. For the early part of Dracula's life, he was known as Vlad. And Vlad was destined for a life of conflict. When he was just a young boy, his father became a first-class member in an elite society called the Order of the Dragon. The order was required to defend the cross and fight the enemies of Christianity. His father was given the nickname Dragon, which, when translated into medieval Romanian, is the name Dracula. As member of the order, his father reigned as prince over a conflicted area called Wallachia, which rested right between Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. This area saw lots of war and was often ruled by both sides at different times. Dracula, in a struggle for his own grip on power, gave his loyalty to each. But the Ottomans weren't sure if they could trust him, so they imprisoned his two sons, the young Vlad and his brother Radu. The boys were held hostage to ensure their father would remain loyal. Taken from his family and homeland angered the young Vlad. During this time is when it's believed he developed an intense hatred for the Ottomans, upon whom he would later earn his gruesome reputation. For 6 years, the boys were held captive at the Egrigaz fortress in the treacherous mountains of what is now central Turkey. There he found refuge in studying warfare, becoming skilled in swordsmanship. Upon his release, he returned to Wallachia to reunite with his family, but soon learned that his father was murdered just before his arrival. These pivotal moments in Vlad's life turned him into a cold and bitter man. With his father gone, Vlad could now try and claim the throne of Wallachia, but he would need the backing of the Hungarian kings. They resisted at first, but once they saw his vast knowledge of the Ottoman Empire, as well as his hatred for them, they crowned him prince and made him a part of the Order of the Dragon. Being the son of Dracula, Vlad was given the name Dracula, the letter A added to the end to signify that he is the son of the dragon. From then on, Vlad officially became known as Dracula. As the new prince of Wallachia, Dracula ordered a purge of potential enemies, and he ruthlessly went after those suspected of murdering his father. Thousands were tortured and executed in his early days as new prince. He gave these orders from the princely court, which is the formal residence and fortress of the Wallachian prince. Today, you can visit the remains of Dracula's fortress in modern-day Târgoviște, Romania. You can tour the building where he once lived and visit the museum that houses many medieval artifacts, along with an exhibit dedicated to the legendary figure. And it was here in this very building where Dracula impaled his first victims. Impalement was his preferred method of execution and torture, This is where a long, sharp stake or a pole is used to gruesomely penetrate a person's body. The stake is then stuck into the ground, with the victim being suspended several feet above the surface. It could sometimes take days for a person to die from this method, and according to stories written at the time, Dracula enjoyed impaling people in his dining room. He then washed his hands in their blood and ate his meals while they screamed in agony. Some stories take it further and claim that he enjoyed dipping his bread in his victim's blood before eating it. These practices earned him another nickname at the time, Vlad the Impaler. Dracula impaled men, women, and even children, but his most terrorizing act was yet to come. As prince, he immediately stopped paying pittance to the Ottoman Empire. This was a payment, or a sort of bribe, that kept the Ottomans happy and secured Dracula's grip on power. Soon, an envoy consisting of a handful of Ottoman diplomats arrived to inquire about the missed payments. Dracula hosted the men in his fortress, but when they refused to move their head coverings in his presence, he grew very angry. So, to ensure that their turbans would forever remain on their heads, he had them nailed to their skulls while they were still alive. Dracula knew that this would only serve to invite the wrath of the Ottomans, which he welcomed, and it did. Angering an entire empire, the Ottomans sent one of their noblemen, along with 1,000 skilled soldiers, to ambush the prince and take him as prisoner. But Dracula caught wind of these plans and began to assemble his own troops near the Ponari castle. Now, there are few castles in Romania that like to claim the title of Dracula's castle, but don't be mistaken, no other structure can claim the name more than this. Resting atop a steep cliffside in the southern Romanian mountains, the Ponari castle towers over the valley where it was built. It took more than 1,400 steps to reach the top of the remote castle. This resulted in its abandonment several times over the years after it was first constructed in the 13th century. But Dracula enjoyed its seclusion and chose to call this place home for much of the time. Legend has it that his first wife threw herself off the tower of this very castle, falling to her death down into the ravine below. Today, you can visit what remains of the castle yourself and walk the many steps to reach to the top. It's only a 2-hour drive from Bucharest, the capital of Romania. The ambush on the Wallachian prince never took place. Instead, Dracula launched a surprise attack and killed the nobleman along with all of his soldiers. For the next several years, he deflected many attacks from the Ottomans, until the leader of the empire himself raised an army to kill Dracula. With a force of 100,000 soldiers, this should have been an easy win for the Ottomans, but Dracula's gruesome tactics changed the odds. Knowing he was outnumbered, the ruthless prince conducted a scorched earth military campaign. This strategy is typically used by a retreating army, which destroys everything in its path as it's fleeing. This prevents the advancing army from using any of the available resources. He burned his own villages, poisoned all of the wells, and locals were forced to evacuate, except for the sick. Those with leprosy, tuberculosis, or the bubonic plague were ordered to stay behind to infect the Ottoman army. Dracula left behind a path of death and destruction, but his worst atrocity was yet to come. As the exhausted and dwindling Ottoman army approached the Wallachian capital of Targovist, they set up camp and prepared for their final assault. With a much smaller force, Dracula resorted to guerrilla warfare tactics, like hit-and-run attacks, as well as surprise raids during the dead of night. He preferred to infiltrate enemy camps while they slept. Armed with spears and swords, Dracula and his army used torches to illuminate the battlefield. They killed as many Ottomans as they could, often capturing enemy soldiers, dragging them away into the dark forest. Morale was at an all-time low in the Ottoman army, but they pushed ahead, believing they could take on Dracula's much smaller army head-on at the capital. As they came within sight of Dracula's fortress, they witnessed Dracula's most gruesome act. Recorded accounts say that in place of a forest of trees, there was a forest of impaled men, women, and children. Some were still alive, freshly impaled with a stake jammed through their body. Others had been dead for months. Their rotting corpses lay limp and decaying. Most of the impaled were Ottomans, some still in their military uniforms, suspended several feet above the ground over a fresh pool of blood. Dracula had been stockpiling the dead from previous raids to create this brutal display. In total, it's estimated that 20,000 people were impaled on the road leading to his home. The forest of the dead struck the Ottomans with such terror that they turned around. Dracula remained prince for quite some time, but his brutal ways made him many enemies, even at home. A former ally, the Hungarian king, betrayed Dracula and imprisoned him for 12 years. Most of this time was spent at the Corvin Castle in a small city in Transylvania. This Gothic-style structure is one of the largest castles in Europe. It has a knight's hall for banquets, an impressive drawbridge for defense. Inside is a large inner courtyard, as well as a chapel and 50 different rooms, adorned with medieval artwork and artifacts. Today you can visit the castle for €5 a person, and for €150 you can even get married in the chapel. The banquet hall is also available for weddings and events. We'll have links with all of that information on our site at gothepodcast.com. Dracula regained the throne as Prince of Wallachia for a third time, but it was short-lived. He was beheaded during battle in January 1477 in southern Romania. He's supposedly buried at the Comana Monastery, a church he founded himself. There are a few other sites that claim to house Dracula's crypt, but none are confirmed. For centuries, his infamous stories were lost to history. It wasn't until 1897 that Bram Stoker wrote Dracula as a vampire in his famous novel. Vampires being the undead creatures that require blood to survive. Throughout history, there have been many other cases of supposed vampires and their victims. As recently as the 1970s, serial killer Richard Chase drank the blood of several of his victims. When police searched his apartment, they found a horrific scene. The walls, floors, ceiling, and all of his eating and drinking utensils were soaked in blood. Another supposed vampire in 1920s Germany was a man by the name of Peter Kürten. Known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, Kürten would suck the blood from the wounds of his victim's neck. On one occasion, he drank so much blood that he vomited. One of the more mysterious vampire murders took place in Sweden in 1932. The Atlas vampire, as he was known, drained all the blood from his victim's body. Authorities never caught the man, but you can see the case file and evidence of the crime at the Stockholm Police Museum. This Halloween, remember, vampires don't like garlic or holy water. A wooden stake driven through the heart will kill them. Any other material won't do. And they hate the sunlight. If you need any more information about Dracula or vampires, visit gothepodcast.com. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, tell a friend or family member about us, and check out our Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, where you can find more content. You can now buy Go the Podcast t-shirts, mugs, hoodies, and more. Go to gothepodcast.com/shop to check them out. I'm Alex Swolinski. Thanks for listening.